This is why you should never trust the ice cream man, part 2. The kid got scared because he saw that the man started driving on a secluded road. He kept on driving for several miles until he eventually pulled up to an old abandoned house. He looked at the kid and said, "Come here," but all of a sudden somebody started banging on the back door. It was the kid's next door neighbor. She grabbed him by the arms and told him to go wait in the car while calling the police. At that moment, the man started driving off as fast as he could down the road. She drove the kid back home, and that's where he saw his parents waiting outside and crying. He had no idea what was going on. However, later on, he found out that the ice cream man was sent to prison for attempted kidnapping.
This is why parents should believe their kids. In 2010, a 15-year-old boy started to notice that the door to his attic, which was in his bedroom, was always open. One day, when his mom's giving him a hard time about being lazy, he's like, "Well, you're one to talk. You always leave my attic door open." She's like, "I haven't touched your attic door in months, and nobody else has either." Not easily frightened, the boy decides to leave the attic door open. And so he's laying in bed, and he kind of looks over at the door, and standing in the door frame is a figure staring right at him. He bolts, tells his parents, they don't believe him, and then 6 months later they move anyway. A few years later, the boy discovers his favorite teacher actually moved into his old house. And so he jokingly asks her, "You ever see any ghosts walking around your attic?" Her face got completely serious, and she's like, as soon as we moved in, the door to the attic kept opening. So we investigated, and we found a trap door that led onto the roof. Someone had been crawling in through that entrance and living in the attic for years.
This is why you should never go to a sleepover. Part 2. Then put his finger on his lips and try to shush John, but John started screaming in terror. John took Robert by the hand and ran as fast as he could to get upstairs. They got to Robert's mom's room and locked the door. Robert's mom immediately woke up and asked what's wrong. That's when they all heard loud footsteps running upstairs, followed by banging on the door. The man was banging on the door, yelling, "I'm gonna kill all of you." Robert's mom was terrified. She called the police, yelling there's an intruder in the house. Everyone was crying and praying that the man would just go away, but the man just kept on banging on the door and screaming. About 2 minutes goes by when they hear police sirens coming from outside, and that's when the man banging on the door stopped. The police ran inside of the house with their guns drawn, but saw no sign of an intruder, except for the living room window being wide.
This is why you should always watch videos to the end. In 2003, a woman came home to her apartment to see that her door was unlocked. She went inside, nothing was missing, so she assumed she must have left it open. When it happened a few more times, but still nothing was missing in her apartment, she went out and got a camera, set it up in her apartment aimed at the front door. The next day, her door was unlocked, so she reviewed the footage. She watches in horror as late in the night, her front door opens and in walks this tall, creepy man who looks around and then walks towards her bedroom off camera. She immediately sprints out of her apartment and calls the police, who show up and tell her to go back in her apartment and just try to stay calm, and that they would put an officer right outside her door so she's safe. As she's sitting on the bed, totally traumatized, she realizes something. She only saw him enter her apartment on that video. She doesn't know if he actually left. As she's sitting there, she feels breathing on her ankles. She runs out, the cop comes in, and he finds the tall, creepy man under the bed holding a knife. This is why you should always trust your gut. In the early 1970s, a college student decided to hitchhike his way home after class. A car pulls up, a man offers him a ride, and he climbs in. As soon as the car started moving, the student felt totally uneasy, like something was wrong but he couldn't quite place it. Without saying anything, he waited till the next time they slowed down and he flung the door open and ran away. 2 years later, he's flicking through TV channels when he comes across this special interview with a death row inmate. And it's just the audio recording, so he hears the interviewer ask the inmate, "Why did you remove all the door handles inside of your car?" The man just goes, "Well, the first time I tried to kill someone, I picked up a college hitchhiker who got smart at some point and jumped out of my car. So, lesson learned, remove all the door handles." When they showed his picture, the student knew immediately that he was supposed to be the first victim of John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown, who had killed over 30 men and boys in his clown room and stuffed them into his basement. This is why you should always change your locks. In 2017, a college girl woke up from a nightmare drenched in sweat and decided to rinse off before going back to sleep. She propped her phone on a shelf, turned on some music, and then hopped in the shower. A few minutes later, she reaches for her phone to change the song, but stops suddenly. Reflected on her phone's screen was a person standing in the middle of her bathroom facing the shower. She somehow kept her composure, turned the water to scalding hot, and then ripped open the curtain and sprayed the intruder in the face. As they howled in pain, she ran past them to her kitchen to get her butcher's knife. In a panic, she can't find her knife, so she just runs out of the apartment and calls the police. The police go in and come out with a crazy-looking woman in handcuffs. One of the officers comes over to the girl and says she used to live here and she had copies of your keys. Then he pauses and looks down and brings up a clear evidence bag that contained her butcher's knife, and he says, "Looks like she wanted her apartment back." This is why you shouldn't go for walks in Sweden. In 2008, a Swedish woman went out for an evening stroll with her dog, but never came back. Her husband went looking for her and found her dead next to a lake. The police immediately blamed her husband and sent him to jail. After a few months, the woman's forensic analysis report came back, and it was clear the husband was innocent because there was all this hair and saliva on the woman's body that was not his. It turns out there is a very strange phenomenon that occurs in Sweden in the fall when all of the apples have fallen off of their trees. Those apples ferment, and then hordes of moose eat those apples, becoming drunk and oftentimes very belligerent, like this. Hair and saliva of the killer belonged to a drunk Swedish moose. This is why you should never explore abandoned ships. In 2014, the US Navy decided to decommission one of its oldest ships, so it brought it into port to be broken down for scrap. Before workers were allowed to actually start breaking it down, the foreman had to go on board and take pictures of every room. So late one night, the foreman spends about an hour walking through this abandoned ship with a flashlight, taking about 100 pictures. When he was done, he emailed the pictures to his boss, who quickly wrote back, "Who's the guy with the axe?" The foreman had no idea what he was talking about, but he noticed the boss had attached one of the pictures that he had just sent him. When he opened it, he nearly fainted. There, in the bowels of the ship, poking his head around a corner, was a faceless man wielding an axe. The foreman had spent over an hour in this hallway and never heard or saw this guy. The Navy searched the ship and never found this guy. They also reviewed security footage of the only entrance, and he never entered or left the ship.
If you see the smiling man, run. Back in 2010, a guy was riding his bike on the back roads when all of a sudden he heard a loud pop. He looked down and saw that his tire went flat, so he had no choice but to walk to his destination. As he was walking, he noticed something out in the distance underneath a light post. As he got closer, he noticed that it was a person. As he got closer, he noticed that the person had a terrifying looking smile. He also noticed that the person was looking directly at him. He was terrified, but he just nodded his head and kept moving forward. Once he got a good distance away, he turned around to see if the person was still there, but instead he screamed out in terror. He turned around and saw that the person was sprinting towards him with the same terrifying smile. He started running as fast as he could until he got to his apartment. He called the police, but they never found the smiling man.
If someone offers you this, walk away. In 2016, a man was staying at his friend's cabin in the woods when he decided to go for an evening stroll. A little ways down the trail, he hears someone call out from behind his neighbor's house. He looks up and he sees this skinny guy pop out from behind the building who starts waving frantically at him to come over. Worried this guy could be in trouble, the man takes off running to assist, but when he gets close enough, the neighbor just offers him a fistful of Slim Jims and starts talking about how much he hates his wife. Sensing there was something wrong with this guy, he says no thank you to the Slim Jims and walks away. The next day, the man calls his friend who owned the cabin to ask him what the deal was with his weirdo neighbor. There was silence on the phone, and then his friend just says, "I don't have any neighbors." The police are called, and it turns out his neighbor was really some lunatic who had recently killed his wife and had been hiding out in the abandoned cabin next.
This is why you should always look under your bed. Back in 2013, a woman was talking to her friend on the phone while looking through the mail. As she was talking, she accidentally dropped her phone and it fell right under her bed. She got on the floor and extended her arm to get the phone, but all of a sudden, she froze with fear. There was a terrifying looking man laying down in the fetal position looking away from her. She kept her composure, grabbed her phone, and said to her friend, "I'm gonna call you back." She then went into the bathroom, locked the door, and crawled right out of the window. She hid behind a car and called the cops. The cops showed up, went to the house, and came back out with a psychotic-looking man. One of the officers came up to her and said, "You're lucky to do what you did, because we found the man standing by the bathroom door holding a..." This is why you should always say no to strangers. Back in 1989, a kid was working at a gas station with his father. He was cleaning aisles when all of a sudden he saw a strange woman walk in through the front door. She went up to his father, who was sitting at the front desk, and asked him for a ride because her car broke down. He automatically refused, and this angered the woman. She then pointed at the kid cleaning the aisles and said, "What about you? Could you give me a ride?" The kid agreed with his father and said no, but this only made the woman angrier. He then started cussing them both out and then left. A year later, the kid is at his house when all of a sudden he heard his dad scream out his name. He rushed on out and what he saw was shocking. On the news, he saw the same woman who came to the gas station a year earlier. It turned out that she was Eileen Warnos, a serial killer who used to get male victims from...
This is why you should never go to the bathroom in the ocean. Just a couple of months ago, a group of men decided to visit the beach for a holiday. When they were there, one of the men had to go to the bathroom really badly, but noticed that there were no toilet stalls nearby. He then told his friends that he was going to pee directly in the ocean, so his friends told him to go farther up. When he went to go to the bathroom, a shark came out of the water from nowhere and bit his willy off. The man was then rushed to the hospital, where unfortunately he was pronounced dead.
This is why you should never stay awake past 3 a.m. A woman in her early 20s was away from home on a business trip. The night before she was supposed to board her plane, she had trouble sleeping and had this intense fear that someone was staring at her in her room. She was up until 3, tossing and turning until she started to hear whispers. It was a deep voice repeating the words, "I'm coming to get you, I'm coming to get you." But she ignored it and eventually fell asleep. After her plane landed, she was exhausted but drove home anyway. About 30 minutes into her drive, she started hearing the same whispers from the previous night, but she thought it was because she was sleep deprived, so she kept driving. She was almost home when she began to feel sick. Her eyes were watering, her nose was running, and she let out a large sneeze. "Bless you," said the same deep, eerie voice. She quickly pulled into her driveway, hugged her husband, and sat down to tell him what was going on. This is why you should always lock your doors. A class was playing a game of Kahoot when they heard a voice on the intercom say, "This is not a drill. Go into lockdown." The students huddled in the back of the classroom and then the power went off. Minutes later, the students heard the sound of a man screaming at the top of his lungs, running down the hallway. The lunatic man started banging on the lockers and his screams gradually got louder. He then started banging on the classroom window, yelling, "Open up." He eventually left, and 10 minutes later, a voice on the intercom said, a mentally ill person had entered the school and attacked the lady at the front desk. The staff did a sweep of the school and still couldn't find him, so they locked the doors and resumed class. Later that night, one of the janitors went into the utility closet when this happened. If something like this ever happens to you, just remember, it's not real. A teenage boy woke up in the middle of the night and was unable to move anything except for his eyes. He then noticed a shadowy figure standing beside his bedroom door. It appeared to be a dark figure with razor-sharp teeth. The boy was absolutely terrified. It came closer to the boy and whispered, "I'll come get you when you're ready to die." Suddenly, the figure transformed into a familiar-looking man. It slowly backed up toward the door when the boy realized it was his father. The boy attempted to call out, "Dad," but sleep paralysis kept him from doing so. They looked at each other for a few minutes, but then the boy's vision became less foggy and he was able to think more clearly. He leapt out of his bed screaming for his dad when he was met by his mother in the hallway. She said, "It's okay, sweetie. I miss him too," because his dad had died 2 months before this.
This sounds totally made up until you listen to the police report. In the early 90s, a teenage girl started to see these shadowy figures that would come into her room at night and crawl all around her room and even grab at her legs. At the same time, her health began to rapidly deteriorate, which ultimately led to her death, which doctors never understood. A few days after her death, her sister woke up to a whistling sound and saw a creature crawling around her room with no face. The same night, her mom was ripped out of bed by someone. The father calls the police, who come over, they search the house, they don't find anything, it's all quiet. As they're about to leave, they hear something. Horrifying screams coming out of the bedroom. They run inside, no one's in there, but there are these huge gashes on the wall that were not there before. The police get out of there. In the police report that was filed immediately after this house call, the chief inspector and the 3 officers that were there that night swear they saw and heard the same things as the family, which means the police officially believed that the house was haunted. Remember, your Amazon Alexa is always listening. In 2018, a girl named Alexa came home to her apartment to find her creepy stalker landlord in her kitchen. She screams and threatens to call the cops, and he just smiles and says, "I was just checking in on you," and leaves. Feeling totally sketched out, spends the next few hours down the hall in her friend's apartment before finally going back to her room to go to bed. That night, she woke up to her Amazon Alexa responding to someone in the room. It said, "I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Did you say I'm watching you?" The girl instantly turns on her lights and looks around, but no one's there. So she unplugs Alexa and is about to go back to sleep when she hears what sounds like a man grunting in her closet. As she's staring at her closet, her Alexa turns back on.
If you're claustrophobic, don't watch this video. In 2018, a store manager was receiving complaints that something was smelling very bad. He went to the front to check it out and he was immediately hit with the horrible smell. He saw that the smell was coming from one of the store pillars, so he called a plumber to check it out. The plumber arrived, he opened the pillar up, and what they saw was horrifying. There was a dead, decomposing body inside of the pillar. 5 days earlier, a man who was running from police ran inside of the store, got on the roof, and somehow fell into the pillar. He tried to force his way out, but each movement made him fall deeper and deeper. He eventually died and began to decompose. His decomposing body is what customers were smelling each time they walked into the store. Could this photo be proof of demons? Back in 2011, police were investigating a house because there were strange things happening on the inside. At first, they believed it was an intruder, but the truth is much worse. Over the next few weeks, they experienced many strange things happening in the house. They would take pictures of shadowy figures, even though they swore that there was nobody in the room. They would hear strange voices caught on camera, as well as loud footsteps coming from the basement. They would even see strange liquid coming from random parts of the house with no source. In the next few weeks, they would have to give up on the investigation, but everybody swore that the house was haunted. Before leaving, they would take one last picture. And in this photo, you could see what appears to be a strange figure standing by the window. This is why you need to lock your doors. In 2015, a kid named Dalton was home alone playing video games when he heard a noise come from downstairs. He put his headset down and went to go check it out. Once he got to the bottom of the staircase, he saw something horrifying. There were 4 fully grown men wearing all black standing in the middle of the living room. Horrified, he slowly walked back up to his room and he told his friends that he was playing games with to call the cops. All of a sudden, he heard someone running up the stairs, so he sprinted to the bathroom and locked the door. Someone began banging on the bathroom door and screaming for him to come out. Dalton opened the window and tried to crawl out, but that's when someone bursted through the door. What happens next is shocking. If you're claustrophobic, Don't watch this video.